Visual cue. A breathless, cinematic, slow-motion sequence bleeds onto the screen. The opulent, blinding grandeur of the White House State Banquet materializes from the velvet darkness. Audio A, symphony of classical music, swells, dark and pulsating with an undeniable, heavy tension, sharply punctuated by the razor-thin, chilling sound of fine crystal glasses clinking. Visual cue, the camera pushes in relentlessly, capturing the piercing, unyielding gaze of King Charles, a sovereign entirely in command of his transatlantic chessboard. A rapid, almost violent cut reveals the radiant, predatory grin of President Donald Trump, reveling in the intoxicating atmosphere of supreme executive power. Then, a sudden, jarring visual whiplash strikes the viewer. The screen goes cold, suddenly drained of all its gilded, imperial warmth. We are thrown violently to the sweeping, terrifyingly silent and isolated gates of a sprawling mansion in Montecito, California. It is a gilded cage, shrouded in the damp coastal fog. It is a fortress built on shifting sand, rapidly drowning in the suffocating, inescapable shadows of royal irrelevance. A historic state visit has just concluded, heralded by the global press as a magnificent masterclass in diplomacy, a towering symbol of healing, an unshakable partnership between two formidable nations. The world watched in absolute, breathless awe as the British monarch and the American president exchanged profound pleasantries, forging an unbreakable alliance in the very beating heart of Washington. Yet, an extraordinary, deeply disturbing paradox unfolded right before our eyes, cleverly hidden in plain sight. Amidst the intoxicating extravagance of the state banquet, concealed behind the polite diplomatic laughter and the glittering reflection of crystal chandeliers, the most chilling, ruthless, and silent death sentence was issued. It was not delivered by a robed judge wielding a heavy wooden gavel. It was not signed with a stroke of a fountain pen on an official wax-sealed legal parchment. It was executed with a wry, aristocratic smile by a reigning father against his own exiled flesh and blood. King Charles III did not merely attend a ceremonial dinner. He presided over a public, brutal, and entirely bloodless execution of Prince Harry's remaining standing on the global stage. We have all heard the deafening whispers, the relentless, seismic rumours regarding the fragile, razor-thin legal status of Prince Harry's American visa. You watch the relentless 2-4 hour news cycles churn out endless, feverish speculation. You see the unprecedented legal battles brewing in federal courts, the conservative think tanks fiercely demanding absolute transparency regarding past indiscretions, and the looming, suffocating threat of deportation hanging over the Duke of Sussex like the mythological sword of Damocles. It is a profoundly precarious, terrifying existence for a man entirely stripped of his formidable institutional armour, desperately clinging to a foreign sanctuary that is rapidly beginning to fracture beneath his expensive designer shoes. But ask yourself this, as you look at the cold, calculated mechanics of supreme power, is it a mere, innocent coincidence that during a geopolitical address of this staggering magnitude, King Charles committed an act of deliberate, fatal amnesia? Make no mistake, a British monarch's speech is never merely a collection of warm sentiments. It is a highly calibrated weapon of mass diplomatic instruction. We must acknowledge the brilliant, formidable, and entirely unsentimental machine operating silently behind the sovereign. This address was not drafted on a whim over a casual cup of morning tea. It was a barnstorming masterpiece engineered by the King's speechwriting team, a concerted institutional effort led by his principal private secretary, Sir Clive Alderton, his deputy, Theo Rich. and the Director of Communications, Tobin Andre. Every single word was a meticulously calculated chess move on a global board. Every pause was a loaded gun, aimed with devastating, unblinking precision. Step back into that cavernous, historically saturated banquet hall for just a moment. The King of the United Kingdom stands resolute before the absolute elite political machinery of the United States. He commands the room with an effortless, centuries-old gravity that simply cannot be manufactured by public relations teams. With a knowing, charismatic twinkle in his eye, he leans into the microphone and delivers a line of pure, unadulterated diplomatic theatre. He playfully remarks that looking at a map of the United States is akin to looking through a family Christmas card list, chronologically ordered through history. It is a brilliant, disarming metaphor that instantly captivates the powerful, politically hardened audience. And then the royal roll call begins, turning the sprawling map of America into a testament of British legacy. He commands the room's undivided attention, his voice echoing with the weight of sovereign authority, as he methodically lists the American territories bearing the indelible, historic mark of his ancestors. Look, there's the Carolers, and there's Georgia. He invokes the rich colonial history of the Deep South, effortlessly charming the regional dignitaries. A personal favourite, Charleston. He effortlessly weaves through time, bringing Annapolis into the spotlight before landing a crucial, heavy, and deeply significant blow. He explicitly, pointedly, and deliberately mentions Prince William County in Virginia. The name of the heir, apparent, the chosen, dutiful son, the future king of the realm. The silence that followed this specific geographical declaration was not empty. It was absolutely, terrifyingly deafening. It was a terrifying vacuum that sucked the diplomatic oxygen from the room for anyone paying close, analytical attention to the underlying subtext. You wait for the inevitable continuation of the geographical pleasantries. The seasoned diplomats, swirling their vintage wines, wait for it. The ferocious royal correspondents, poised with their pens and recording devices, wait for the politically correct, pacifying inclusion of the exiled second son. We all expected it because Sussex County is a very real, tangible place. It exists, firmly and prominently printed on the map of the United States, a geographical reality that could have easily been woven into the charming narrative. Yet, from the lips of the sovereign, there is nothing but an echoing, brutal, and utterly unforgiving void. Not a single solitary syllable was uttered to acknowledge the existence of Sussex. There was no mention of Harrisburg or Henry, West Virginia. There was not even a fleeting, passing, perhaps slightly humorous reference to somewhere called Markle in Indiana. Nothing. In the incredibly high-stakes arena of royal statecraft, an omission is never simply an innocent oversight or a slip of an aging memory. Omission is a deliberate, highly sophisticated weapon of total narrative destruction. The complete and utter erasure of the title belonging to his second son was a surgical, diplomatic strike of the highest and most devastating order. This was not a forgotten line, hastily skipped over on an electronic teleprompter. This was a public, globally televised annihilation of relevance and status. Are we truly, genuinely expected to believe it is a mere coincidence that this brazen public erasure took place while staring directly into the eyes of the host nation's leader? A president who, according to exclusive internal disclosures from respected biographers, harbours profound, unwavering admiration for the King and the Prince of Wales, whilst simultaneously reserving incredibly harsh, unfiltered disdain for the Sussexes. President Trump, a man who famously operates on absolute loyalty and respects unapologetic, ruthless strength, sat back and watched the British monarch systematically cut the cord on the world stage. The president was not just a passive spectator. He was an active, willing, and utterly thrilled participant in this grand theatre of power. His dynamic with the king was so electric, so incredibly resonant, that he literally leapt to his feet in sheer, unbridled excitement during the presentation of a symbolic bell from HMS Trump. Have you ever, in your lifetime, witnessed a more terrifying, magnificent, and flawlessly executed display of soft power? A king does not need to shout to destroy an adversary. A king does not need to issue threatening decrees, hire expensive lawyers, or engage in vulgar public shouting matches on television. He simply needs to act as if the offending party has entirely ceased to exist. When the head of an ancient, unyielding, thousand-year-old institution publicly and deliberately distances himself from a rogue individual, the ripples are absolutely catastrophic. The sovereign stood on foreign soil and, without uttering a single negative word, broadcasted a lethal, undeniable message to the highest echelons of the American government. The message, wrapped securely in the velvet glove of an after-dinner speech, was crystal clear. This man, this Duke of Sussex, is no longer under the protection of the Crown. He is no longer a part of our institutional narrative. He is, for all intents and purposes of state affairs, a ghost. Could this chilling, meticulously planned silence be the ultimate covert nod of approval? Is it a royal green light, wrapped in diplomatic charm, handed directly to the American administration, granting them the ultimate, unspoken permission to decide the legal and geographical fate of a traitor to the Crown? The institutional machine has spoken loudly and violently by saying absolutely nothing at all. The protective golden shield of the monarchy has been permanently, irrevocably lowered, leaving the exile completely exposed to the elements. As the thunderous, rapturous applause rolled through the White House, echoing off the historic walls, the devastating reverberations were surely felt all the way across the continent. They must have violently rattled the reinforced windows of a silent, heavily guarded estate in California. It is the tragic, inescapable realization of a son abandoned not by a sudden emotional fit of rage, but by total, devastating, and mathematically calculated institutional indifference. It is the ultimate, inescapable punishment for biting the hand that feeds you on a global platform. Think about the sheer audacity of rewriting history in real time. The monarchy survives not by embracing its rebels, but by expertly and clinically excising them from the official record. By deliberately bypassing the geographical echoes of his own son, King Charles demonstrated a masterclass in psychological warfare. It is a ruthless tactic, as old as the Tudor courts, where falling out of the sovereign's favour meant being physically erased from tapestries and royal portraits. Today, that erasure happens live on global television networks, streamed directly to the smartphones of billions of subjects. The Duke of Sussex, who has built an entire lucrative industry on speaking his truth and demanding public apologies, is suddenly confronted with a monolithic opponent who refuses to even acknowledge his existence on a map. How does one fight back against complete and utter apathy? How does one monetize a grievance when the institution you are relentlessly attacking behaves as if you are nothing more than a microscopic, irrelevant speck of dust on the world stage? The sheer brilliance of the King's speech lies entirely in its weaponized innocence. No fierce critic can ever accuse him of malice, for he merely spoke of history and geography. No breathless tabloid can claim he launched an unprovoked attack, for his words were steeped in warmth, humour, and diplomatic grace. Yet, the deliberate omission hangs heavy in the air, a thick, suffocating cloud of rejection that is entirely legally defensible, but emotionally catastrophic. This is the terrifying, unyielding reality of taking on Britain plea. It is a monumental machine that does not feel anger. It only processes threats and elegantly, silently neutralizes them. And as the President of the United States laughed and applauded the brilliant rhetoric, a silent pact was seemingly forged over crystal goblets and fine china. The invisible safety net of royal privilege, which has silently shielded the Duke from the harshest realities of immigration law and public accountability, has been completely severed with a polite smile. The profound chill of that Washington evening will forever define the new era of the Windsor reign. An era where the Crown aggressively protects itself, first, last, and always, leaving those who foolishly wander outside the castle walls to the absolute mercy of the wolves. The verdict is finally in, and it was delivered with a standing ovation. The invisible guillotine having dropped on the Sussex name, the true, breathtaking masterclass in psychological warfare was only just beginning to unfold across the Atlantic stage. The British Monarchy, an entity that has survived centuries of revolution and ruin, does not require brute force or vulgar displays of military might to subjugate its modern adversaries. They wield something far more terrifying, insidious, and infinitely more effective: the intoxicating, paralyzing, and absolute weight of soft power. Observe the King with forensic attention as he navigates the perilous diplomatic minefield that is President Donald Trump. This is a notoriously prickly, highly unpredictable leader who commands the free world, thrives on chaos, and famously demands absolute, unwavering fealty from everyone who enters his orbit. Many anticipated friction, or perhaps a humiliating faux pas, yet King Charles did not approach him with even a shadow of apprehension. Instead, the monarch advanced with the cool, calculated precision of an apex predator who has spent a lifetime studying the weaknesses of powerful men. He executed a psychological maneuver so completely flawless, so utterly disarming, it left seasoned political analysts entirely speechless in its wake. In the glittering epicenter of the grand state banquet, the sovereign unexpectedly presented the American president with a bespoke historical artifact, carefully curated for this exact manipulative purpose. He gifted him a brass bell, salvaged from the very Royal Navy ship named HMS Trump. The result of this calculated, hyper-personalized flattery was instantaneous, visceral, and utterly spectacular to witness. The most powerful, intimidating man in the world, usually so fiercely guarded and physically dominant, was instantly reduced to a state of giddy, unbridled excitement. He literally leapt to his feet in the middle of the carefully choreographed royal address, entirely unable to contain his sheer delight at the sudden unveiling of the artifact. That is my bell. In the masterful, experienced hands of King Charles, the notoriously ferocious, rally-rousing American president was effortlessly transformed into a compliant, purring pussycat. This is precisely how the institution guarantees its survival across the centuries. It domesticates the loudest, most dangerous disruptors in the room without ever breaking a sweat, without ever raising a voice, and without ever compromising its own ancient dignity. While the king brilliantly orchestrated the grand, sweeping political symphony, his queen was silently deploying her own lethal, highly sophisticated, sartorial artillery. Watch closely as the television cameras pan slowly across the elegant, poised form of Queen Camilla at the glittering Christie's reception. Many royal observers and fashion critics were acutely surprised by her deliberate, calculated decision to step into the intense diplomatic spotlight without a diamond tiara resting upon her head. But you must never mistake this deliberate absence for a display of meek humility, for her true, devastating weapon lay in a far more subtle, calculating subtlety. She chose to drape herself in the exquisite, masterful tailoring of Dior, a deliberate, highly strategic nod to the favoured fashion house of First Lady Melania Trump. It was a flawless diplomatic embrace, a visual, unspoken alliance woven directly into the very threads of her expensive garments. Yet, the most shocking, the most profoundly chilling and controversial detail of the entire evening hung quietly, almost innocently, from her wrist. The Queen Consort deliberately chose to carry a very specific, highly recognisable, and historically loaded Dior handbag. It was not just any luxury accessory pulled randomly from a palace vault. It was the iconic design famously created for and forever fiercely associated with the late Princess Diana. It was a version of the legendary bag that Diana was gifted in France in 1995, which instantly became a global fashion phenomenon. The psychological magnitude of this specific fashion choice is simply staggering to comprehend when you peel back the layers of royal history and bitter family feuds. You must ask yourself, what message is truly being broadcast to the watching globe, and more importantly, to the exiled son, watching furiously from California? Is this an act of profound, healing grace and magnanimous forgiveness from the woman who weathered decades of relentless public vitriol? Or is it the ultimate, unapologetic assertion of absolute, terrifying victory? It is the striking image of the final woman standing, the one who successfully ascended the highest throne, casually holding the literal and metaphorical baggage of the beloved predecessor who tried to tear the institution down. To truly understand the terrifying, crushing gravity of the crown, you must witness exactly what happens to the arrogant, foolish individuals who dare to challenge its supremacy. Enter Zoran Mamdani, a left-wing New York politician who desperately sought to court public favour and social media clout through loud anti-royalist rhetoric. Standing safely behind the protective shield of television cameras and friendly journalists, he arrogantly boasted that he was not particularly bothered about meeting the king. He proudly proclaimed that if he did happen to cross paths with the sovereign, he would fiercely demand the immediate return of the Koh-i-Noor diamond. This is a legendary gem steeped in centuries of blood, executions, and curses, famously given to Queen Victoria and now locked away in the Tower of London. It was a theatrical, highly provocative declaration of war against colonial history, designed solely to paint himself as a fearless, modern crusader against the British monarchy. But harsh reality is often a cruel, deeply humiliating mirror for those who trade exclusively in cheap, manufactured outrage. Watch the actual, excruciating footage of the moment this loud-mouthed, virtue-signalling critic finally stood face to face with the quiet, overwhelming majesty of the King and Queen. The radical politician who promised his supporters fire and brimstone was suddenly struck entirely, pathetically dumb in the presence of true royalty. In the full, unedited audio of their interaction, there is not a single, solitary syllable uttered about the Koh-i-Noor diamond, nor any other historical grievance he had loudly promised to champion. The imposing, unshakable aura of a 1,000-year-old institution effortlessly crushed his manufactured, paper-thin rebellion into absolute, suffocating silence. He was mercilessly exposed on the world stage as nothing more than a hollow vessel, a man who is entirely all talk and absolutely no trousers. Branded a royal disgrace by the local press, his rapid capitulation proved a universal truth about the enduring nature of power. The crown does not need to stoop to argue with its minor, fleeting detractors. It merely has to stand in front of them and watch them spectacularly crumble under the immense weight of their own insignificance. Yet, the true, enduring, and unassailable power of this ancient firm does not solely rely on psychological dominance, sartorial warfare, and the political humiliation of its critics. Its most potent, unshakable foundation is forged in its genuine capacity for profound, silent, and dignified empathy. The narrative of the tour shifts abruptly from the glittering, champagne-soaked banquets to the sombre, grey, tear-stained stones of Ground Zero. Here, amidst the echoes of unimaginable loss, the King and Queen stood in absolute mournful stillness. They laid a floral tribute, paying their deepest, most sincere respects to the families of the victims and the heroic emergency services who worked through the horrors of September 11th. There were no grand, sweeping speeches required here, no cunning political manoeuvring, only the raw, shared weight of profound human tragedy. Every member of the royal family who visits New York regards it as an absolute priority to pay their solemn respects at this sacred site. It is a poignant, tear-inducing reminder of the famous, heartbreakingly beautiful words once spoken by the late Queen Elizabeth II following a previous tragedy. Grief is the price we pay for love. Those 8 devastating words, quoted by royal experts and echoing through the hallowed ground of New York, draw the most brutal psychological contrast imaginable. On one side of the vast American continent, you have the working royals dutifully bowing their heads to honour the catastrophic loss of thousands of innocent lives, fulfilling a solemn, lifelong vow of global service. And on the exact opposite side, trapped behind the sun-drenched, heavily secured gates of a Californian mansion, you have a relentless, exhausting, and entirely self-serving chorus of vanity. An endless, pitiful stream of podcast grievances, highly paid televised complaints, and bitter, lingering victimhood over entirely imagined slights and revoked royal privileges. The juxtaposition is not merely stark. It is an absolute, undeniable, psychological massacre of the Sussex brand. The institution continues to command the deep reverence of the free world precisely because it understands the sacred, unifying duty of shared sorrow. Meanwhile, the rogue individual, entirely consumed by his own reflection and manufactured miseries, slowly fades into a bitter, resentful, and increasingly irrelevant punchline. This is not just a successful exercise in international diplomacy. It is the ruthless, magnificent, and entirely unapologetic survival of the fittest. A stark, brutally dividing line slices down the very centre of the screen, creating a suffocating, claustrophobic, split-screen effect. Imagine, for just one agonising, deeply uncomfortable moment, the sheer, unadulterated psychological torment of watching your own flesh and blood being universally exalted on the world's most powerful stage. Ask yourself how it must truly feel to sit in self-imposed exile, staring blankly at glowing television screens, whilst the entire globe bows in deep, unfeigned reverence to your father and your brother. You are forced to sit in the shadows and watch the glittering, magnificent pageant of history unfold completely without you. You are acutely, painfully aware that you no longer possess the inherent right, nor the respected institutional pedigree, to stand within that golden, immortalized frame. This is the profound, suffocating, and entirely inescapable tragedy of the outsider looking in at a mighty fortress he once proudly called his birthright. It is a bitter, terribly cold reality that is entirely, undeniably of his own catastrophic making. The most devastating, heartbreaking truth of this entire transatlantic royal saga is not that the Duke of Sussex was violently or maliciously cast out by a cruel and vindictive monarchy. The true, unvarnished tragedy is that he voluntarily, recklessly walked away from an ancient empire that desperately wanted to keep him safely within its protective, golden embrace. When Prince Harry and Meghan Markle first made the earth-shattering, unprecedented decision to step back from their royal duties and relocate overseas, the late Queen Elizabeth II was profoundly keen for them to remain deeply involved. The beloved, globally revered matriarch issued a remarkably warm, highly empathetic public statement at the time of their departure. She made it abundantly, beautifully clear that whilst they would no longer be working members of the institution, they would always remain highly valued, much-loved members of her family. They were offered a profound, sacred promise of familial loyalty. They were explicitly assured that they would be enthusiastically welcomed back to the royal fold at every possible, appropriate opportunity. In an alternate, far less destructive, and much more dignified timeline, Harry and Meghan could have easily been the distinguished guests of honour at this very state banquet in Washington. They could have seamlessly and brilliantly acted as the Crown's glamorous, highly effective, unofficial ambassadors on American soil. They could have functioned as our cherished friends, effectively operating as our family overseas, bringing a touch of modern royal magic to international relations. But that shimmering golden future was completely incinerated in a relentless, highly lucrative, and deeply vindictive inferno of televised grievances, tell-all memoirs, and explosive podcast interviews. If they had not launched a series of calculated, devastating, and deeply personal public attacks on the royal family, this is precisely the sort of magnificent, historic occasion they would have undoubtedly been invited to attend. Instead, driven by perceived slights and a thirst for independent wealth, they methodically and ruthlessly burnt every single bridge that connected them to their formidable ancestral homeland. They tragically traded a priceless, irreplaceable millennium of royal heritage for a few fleeting, hollow years of Hollywood celebrity. And now, as the bright, artificial lights of the entertainment industry begin to inevitably dim, they are left standing completely alone in the cold. They must watch in absolute, unbearable silence as the real, tangible power of statehood completely ignores their desperate pleas for attention. Now, the charred, smoking ashes of those burnt bridges lie scattered across the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. The brutal, unforgiving mechanics of institutional expulsion have permanently, irreversibly taken hold of their destiny. The harsh dividing line on the screen violently snaps, and the dark, isolated Californian gates are entirely consumed by the radiant, triumphant image of King Charles III enthusiastically waving to massive, adoring American crowds. This extraordinarily successful, impeccably executed American tour has unequivocally proven a cold, hard, and undeniable political truth to the watching world. The British monarchy is absolutely not a fragile, overly emotional family unit that shatters into a million pieces when a disgruntled member decides to pack their designer bags and leave in a huff. It is an ancient, indestructible, 1,000-year-old leviathan that simply absorbs the shock and continues its relentless march through history. It is the ultimate, unapologetic embodiment of Britain plea, a colossal, highly efficient diplomatic engine that operates entirely independently of individual egos and petty family squabbles. It is a monumental, awe-inspiring entity that has successfully weathered world wars, constitutional crises, and the dramatic abdications of actual kings. The mere temper tantrums of a disgruntled prince and his wife are nothing more than a microscopic, entirely insignificant blip on the grand sweeping radar of royal history. The institution does not panic. It does not issue emotional rebuttals. and it certainly does not lower itself to the murky, undignified level of reality television drama. The voluntary departure and the subsequent hostile, highly publicised rebellion of a few rogue individuals did not cause this magnificent machine to stumble, falter, or collapse in on itself. On the contrary, it appears to have ruthlessly and effectively pruned the dead, toxic branches, allowing the main, historic trunk of the institution to operate with far more strength, absolute clarity, and spectacular brilliance than ever before. The welcoming mat was well and truly rolled out by the American people, utterly devoid of the carping, negative criticism that some anxious palace insiders might have nervously feared before the trip began. The royal couple has gone down terribly well here, demonstrating with absolute clarity that the sheer gravitational pull of the crown remains totally unmatched on the global geopolitical stage. No single individual, regardless of how many millions of dollars they are paid by streaming giants to complain endlessly about their privileged royal childhood, can ever hope to successfully rival the staggering, deeply rooted geopolitical weight of the reigning British sovereign. The institution has undeniably won the war of public perception, and it has won it with a devastating, polite, and completely effortless aristocratic smile. The triumphant sunlit imagery of the king's departure slowly fades, replaced by the dimly lit, highly classified interior of an executive office where President Donald Trump sits holding a freshly printed copy of Robert Hardman's royal biography. The King of the United Kingdom has now departed the United States, leaving behind a glowing trail of diplomatic glory and entirely revitalized transatlantic alliances. But it is the invisible, highly toxic, and politically charged residue left in the wake of this historic visit that should truly terrify the isolated exiles hiding behind their expensive Montecito walls. The sovereign has strategically left behind a phenomenally powerful, newly emboldened American president who holds the keys to the kingdom. This is a man who has just publicly and enthusiastically expressed his absolute, unwavering admiration for King Charles, whilst offering incredibly warm, flattering words of profound concern and deep respect for the Princess of Wales. He holds the Prince of Wales in equally high regard, cementing an alliance that entirely bypasses the Californian outpost. Yet crucially and terrifyingly for the Duke of Sussex, this same president harbours a vastly different, deeply hostile and unforgiving sentiment towards the rogue couple. Behind closed, heavily guarded doors in the absolute highest corridors of American executive power, the president's words regarding the Sussexes were notably and menacingly less flattering. This is not merely a political difference of opinion. This is a highly personal, deeply ingrained disdain from a leader who famously prizes absolute loyalty above all other human traits. The Duke of Sussex, currently embroiled in unprecedented, highly publicised legal disputes regarding the intimate details of his American visa application, is suddenly looking extremely vulnerable. For years, he has boldly operated under the arrogant assumption that the invisible, protective halo of his royal birth would permanently shield him from the harsh, unforgiving consequences of the real world. But King Charles has just unequivocally demonstrated that this protective halo has been violently, permanently switched off. The historic, perfectly delivered White House speech, the one that surgically and deliberately amputated the very word Sussex from the official royal narrative, has definitively concluded. But the invisible, crushing legal gears within the United States immigration and justice departments, have they only just begun to relentlessly, unstoppably turn? We must ask ourselves, with absolute, terrifying sincerity, what happens to a man when his ultimate, invisible shield of royal privilege is publicly, globally, and entirely revoked by his own father. When the supreme untouchable institution, deliberately and visibly, turns its back on you, openly signalling to the world and its leaders that you are no longer under its formidable diplomatic protection, the consequences are invariably, catastrophically fatal. Without the immense, terrifying, and historical power of the Crown standing silently behind him to deter his political, legal, and media adversaries, how quickly will this profoundly fragile, isolated individual be torn apart by the waiting wolves when the impenetrable fortress of the monarchy permanently closes its iron gates and extinguishes the light? How long will it take before he simply, quietly, and permanently fades into the darkest, coldest, and most unforgiving shadows of historical irrelevance? The screen goes entirely, completely black as a single, heavy, and terrifyingly final thud of a heavy wooden judge's gavel violently echoes through the absolute darkness. The execution is complete.